It's now time for me to give the presidential address. My presidential address this year is ensuring a successful research endeavour. And what I've decided to do was to outline the guidelines and principles that I used for the recently presented report that I wrote of the same name to government about the research councils. Now, my first question is, why do we do research? Now, research in the sciences, medicine, mathematics, technologies, arts, and humanities all produce knowledge that enhances our culture and our civilization and can be used for the public good. It is aimed at generating knowledge of the natural world and of ourselves, knowledge that can be developed into useful applications, including driving innovation for sustainable economic growth, improving our health, our prosperity, and the quality of our lives, and maintaining the environment. These applications have always been the case since the beginning of modern science in the 17th century, when Francis Bacon argued that science improved learning and knowledge, which leads to the relief of man's estate. Today, for advanced nations such as the UK to prosper as knowledge economies, scientific research is absolutely essential, both to produce that knowledge and also the skills and the people to use that knowledge. And that is why science should occupy a central place in government thinking if the UK is to thrive in our increasingly sophisticated scientific and technological age. However, scientific research is not solely utilitarian. It generates knowledge that enhances humanity more generally. In the words of Robert Wilson, director of the Fermilab Particle Accelerator, when asked by the US Congressional Joint Committee on Atomic Energy whether the accelerator in any way involved the security of the country, he replied, "It has to do with the dignity of men, our love of culture. It has nothing to do directly with defending our country, except to help make it worth defending." We should not forget that. Research and development in the UK is funded by government, by private companies, by charitable organisations. Government-funded research usually generates openly available knowledge and trains a scientific workforce and develops the skills necessary for the effective running of the country. It is also able to monitor research being carried out throughout the UK and throughout the world. In contrast, research funded by private companies most often is aimed at developing knowledge into useful commercial applications and is usually restricted in accessibility to maintain commercial advantage. Charitable organisations support research into specific objectives of interest to philanthropic organisations, often with an emphasis on biomedicine. Now, the research funded in these different ways often overlaps. It's carried out in different and diverse sectors and research disciplines, but it forms a network of discovery science, acquiring new knowledge, of translation of that knowledge into innovation, and of developments for applications. It is a complex, interactive system, with knowledge generated at different places within the spectrum of activities, influencing both upstream in the creation of new discoveries and downstream in the production of new inventions and applications. New discoveries enable new inventions, and new inventions enable new discoveries. An effective research system for producing knowledge for the public good is characterized by freedom of action and freedom of movement. It needs to be permeable and fluid. allow the ready transfer of ideas, skills and people in all directions between the different sectors, between research disciplines, and between the various parts of the research endeavour. Throughout the system, research thrives on excellent scientists who are strongly motivated, most often by great curiosity and by the freedom to pursue their intellectual interests, and shares many values and common practices. It is built on respect for reliable and reproducible data, a sceptical approach which challenges both orthodoxy and the researcher's own ideas, an abhorrence of the falsification or cherry-picking of data, a commitment to the pursuit of truth. Science can only succeed when it is grounded in integrity and in good practice. However, despite sharing many values and practices, there are specific differences in the way that research is carried out in different parts of the system, and I want to comment on these. Discovery research, sometimes called basic or fundamental research, although I don't like those terms, discovery research aims at acquiring new knowledge about the natural world and ourselves. It can work in various ways, but most often proceeds through an iterative process of hypothesis generation and subsequent challenge. A researcher considers what is known about the subject of interest and generates a hypothesis. These hypotheses are then challenged by investigating the predictions that they make through experiment and observation. Should the new data obtained not support the hypothesis being tested, then it is either rejected or modified, and new hypotheses tested by further observations and experiments. This approach is complemented by other ways, more exploratory ways of working, aimed at accumulating sufficient knowledge to define a field of study and subsequently to generate hypotheses that can be tested. Overall, as a consequence, the ideas driving an investigation may well change during the course of an investigation. The original hypotheses can change, even the phenomena under study may change. An important outcome of this is that although discovery research is efficient at producing knowledge, it is often difficult to predict where the research may go. Through this mechanism of challenge and modification, the scientific process is essentially self-correcting, and it is this characteristic which makes scientific research a reliable way to gather knowledge about the world. Applied research is more goal-directed, aimed at achieving specific objectives and outcomes. For this to work successfully, there are two necessary conditions. Objectives need to be well chosen, based on understanding of customer needs, whether societal or commercial, to ensure that the applications being developed by the research are indeed worthwhile. Also, the knowledge base required for the application needs to be sufficiently well developed so that effective development of the application is generally foreseeable, at least the course of it. Its execution requires a directed approach and frequently uses a diverse, multidisciplinary skill set. So similar values, but somewhat different practices. In between, we have translational research, which aims to bridge discovery and application approaches. It can be considered as oriented discovery research. The objective is to expand the knowledge base in a certain area to a point when more directed development work becomes possible that then can lead to desired applications. However, there can be a danger with such activity that if more directed approaches are applied too early, the research may become less responsive to the self-corrected mechanisms crucial for the scientific process, whereby the researcher changes direction as a consequence of new data, new ideas, and new hypotheses. And this can waste effort to the ultimate detriment of the long-term objectives. If the ultimate driving force is to achieve a specific objective, rather than to gain knowledge relevant for that objective, then the researcher may not respond effectively to the signals from new knowledge indicating that that original aim may not be achievable in that manner. In short, to rush into translation may result in becoming lost in translation. The aim of translational research should be to increase the knowledge base to determine what applications may be possible, whereupon more highly directed approaches can be taken. Therefore, it is usually more effective to identify research objectives in a broadly scoped manner, giving freedom for the individual researcher to propose a specific program within that wider umbrella and to pursue that research wherever it may lead. Making good decisions about what research topics and what researchers should be supported is an integral part of the research process. It is crucial for a successful, cost-effective research endeavour. It requires proper investment in good quality decision-making, which should not be seen as an administrative burden, but rather as an essential part of the research process that can ensure that research funds are spent wisely. Doing high-quality research is hard. In fact, it is very hard. And there needs to be a clear focus on excellence, along with a recognition that the actual outcomes achieved may not be what was originally planned, as I've already explained. The highest standards need to be applied when judging whether research is indeed excellent. I go around many universities and research establishments and I'm told everything I see is excellent. I'm not sure it's always true. 3 factors are particularly important for scientific research funding decisions: the researchers undertaking their work, the research program itself, and the circumstances under which the research is to be pursued. And I want to consider each of these. Research discoveries are often associated with talented individuals who combine a number of qualities. They need to have in-depth knowledge with a wider peripheral understanding of related work. They should possess the necessary skills, be creative, understand the values of research, how it is done. They need to be motivated, they need to be highly effective. Some research problems require a diverse body of researchers with different skills and different approaches. Freedom of thought and action and to pursue an investigation is essential. A researcher who is too strongly directed from above or whose thoughts are restrained is unlikely to be fully effective in research. Similarly, at least in my view, societies which do not encourage freedom will find it harder to excel in research. The research program should tackle an interesting problem and should demonstrate, when it is proposed, both a creative and yet also a practical approach. In the discovery part of the research continuum, the problem being proposed needs to have the potential for scholarly impact, which should be incidentally included as part of any judgment of impact of research activity. I'm always surprised that all the discussions about impact seldom mention scholarly impact, serious scholarly impact. A similar approach should be used for most translational research, which has the ultimate aim of improving the knowledge base relevant for an application of potential societal or commercial benefit. In contrast, for research aimed at specific applications, as I've already argued, a more directed approach is required, using assessment of the needs of the customer or of the market for the research applications. The third issue in making these decisions that needs to be considered in research funding is the location and circumstances under which the research is being carried out. Is there an adequate infrastructure in place? Are the appropriate colleagues involved? Centres of research excellence obviously can help here, but funding mechanisms need to be flexible, need to be inclusive, so that support is possible wherever the quality research can take place. Sometimes novel approaches to problems can emerge more readily when carried out away from conventional centres of excellence, which sometimes become too dominated by current fashions and by strong research leaders. Freedom to breathe in other places. What are the best mechanisms for making these funding decisions? Well, decisions should be driven mainly by peer-level scientists carrying out relevant research. They are the ones best placed to come, on the whole, to best decisions. For translational research, review by peer-level scientists needs some input from those with the potential to apply the research. And in turn, these should take a more leading role in decisions about applied research. A well-run response mode funding system with effective peer review is a very successful way to deliver new scientific knowledge because it uses those with the best understanding of the work that is being proposed. But how can science deliver effectively for society? In discovery and translational research modes, the funder allows the body of knowledge and capability to grow wherever it may seem most fruitful generally to the researcher. What is then required, however, in addition, are efficient mechanisms for the capture of that knowledge when it is useful for potential applications. I'm arguing for a focus not on directing the research, but allowing it to be free, but to be captured extremely effectively. An approach is required in which discovery and translational research are the major drivers for knowledge generation, and that there then is a culture that can efficiently capture that knowledge when it is relevant for application. In the application mode, the funder chooses to shape to some extent how that body of knowledge and capability develops. For example, a charitable funder might decide to invest in the improved understanding of a specific disease. Or the government might invest in such a way as to address perceived skill gaps for the economy or society. I think it's important to recognise these differences because sometimes we argue about these things when, if you just clearly identify the differences there is no need for argument. Bringing about benefit for society from research introduces the issue of how much politicians should be involved in decision-making about research funding. Important here, at least in this country, is the Haldane Report of 1918, nearly 100 years ago. Viscount Haldane argued what is frankly almost a truism, that decisions about the allocation of research funding are best taken by those who have the expertise and the experience to know where it will be best spent. What has been termed the Haldane Principle, although I challenge you to find a Haldane Principle in that 1918 report, but what is termed the Haldane Principle is usually interpreted today as meaning that researchers and not politicians should decide how to spend funds. Now, it must always be remembered that publicly funded research consumes very significant financial resources, and these are ultimately the responsibility of democratically elected representatives. It's usually accepted that politicians, informed by external expert advice, should decide on the overall science budget and contribute to the high-level allocation of resources. For example, sometimes identifying specific challenges and key infrastructures. These decisions are never fully technocratic because they need also to reflect the desires of the society that provides that funding, including the views of society's representatives. However, it is crucial to get the mechanisms right that result in a good relationship between politicians throughout government and expert researchers if we are to ensure that the best decisions are made. We need an effective dialogue and understanding in place between research scientists, politicians, and the public. Without this engagement and without societal endorsement, the research endeavour will ultimately stall or it will fail. Good policies and strategies developed by researchers who know how science operates, working together with policymakers and those responsible for societal and commercial interests, are essential for a successful research endeavour for society. It requires an effective way of working between these organisations and sectors, a compact that bonds science and society, which will both deliver excellent science and ensure that excellent science can be used for the public good. Without this in place, there is a risk of science becoming marginalised, with limited influence on public policy making, resulting in reduced funding for research. That's crucial for us to recognise. None of these principles and guidelines can be effective without sufficient funding. In delivering an effective research endeavour, it's important to recognise that there are upper and lower bounds for optimal funding. If the boundary is set high, that is with too much funding, there is a danger that the research supported may be of too low a quality. If the boundary is set too low, with too little funding, then the research endeavour rapidly becomes dysfunctional. There is, of course, usually little danger of there being too much money for research. More common is below optimal funding levels, which result in stress within the research endeavour, wasting time and resources, and resulting in decision-making becoming a lottery. Similarly, with the balance between infrastructure spending and resource spending for operations, there is no precise optimum. But there are, once again, upper and lower boundaries. If infrastructure is allowed to decay too much, then the delivery of research and the effective utilisation of resource spending is damaged. If capital spending becomes restricted beyond at least the very short term, research will suffer because it is mostly, that is, research is mostly a venture that is highly dependent on the latest technologies, methodologies, and infrastructures, and these all require capital spend. Equipment needs to be replaced. Laboratory and science infrastructure facilities need to be refreshed. In contrast, if the upper boundary is exceeded, then laboratories and facilities can be put in place that are underutilised or absorb operational funds that put the rest of the research endeavour under strain. This can be best dealt with by ensuring that capital investment decisions are made contingent on sufficient resources being in place to ensure the efficient operation of the new infrastructures or facilities, and that decisions are supported by good knowledge and a database of the UK research landscape and capability. In short, we need information to make good decisions, and we need to apply that information to making those good decisions, and it needs to involve both scientists and also our political masters. There are no hard and fast rules that can be applied as to the precise percentage of GDP that should be devoted to the public funding of research. Given the significance of research for driving productivity and sustainable economic growth and societal good more generally, there should be sufficient support in place to ensure that the UK has an effective, knowledge-based society and economy. Comparisons of spend in other countries can provide a good starting point for discussions setting levels of support. The last 5 years of flat cash for science in the UK has resulted in 0.49% of the UK's GDP being invested by the government into research and development, 0.49%. This level of investment is low compared with other similar nations. The top 10 OECD countries on average invest 0.67% of GDP, nearly 50% more, and their range from 0.49% to 1.09%. So we are at the bottom end of that range. The Royal Society, has argued that by 2020 we should at least match the average of 0.67%. In the recent spending review, it was announced by the Chancellor that for the next 5 years investment will remain constant in real terms, rising with inflation. So it could have been worse, has to be said, it could have been worse. But this figure, therefore, of 0.49% is unlikely to change much during this period. It is crucial that we all work to raise that investment so that science is adequately supported if science is to deliver all it is able to do for society. This address is my last formal duty as President of the Society. I want to thank my fellow officers, the Executive Director, successive councils, fellows and foreign members of the Society, and all the Society's staff who work behind the scenes for all their help and all their support during the last 5 years. It has been a privilege to serve the Society as President. And I want to wish my successor, Venki Ramakrishnan, the very best of luck for a highly successful and highly enjoyable presidency. Thank you very much. Thank you.